Hi. So I go to a lot of these conferences, and oftentimes I'm sitting out there with you all, and often people talk about, all of the big ideas, but it's rare that we actually get to hear all of the kind of backstory behind these internet movements that happen. So that's my goal for today, is to tell you about kind of the details and some of the smaller sized insights that have happened over the course of this project that I've been running for the last several years. So the title of the talk is Getting Broken, and Forked for the Planet. So first of all, I want to start out with one very simple fact, which is that most people, when we talk about the environment and environmental impacts, we have no idea what we're talking about. We are all kind of, making grand claims or doing a lot of speculation, but we don't necessarily, most people don't actually understand what the ramifications of any given action they take regarding the environment, what those are. And there are actually only a few people on Earth who are really qualified to make broad statements about environmental impact. So, for example, one of those people is a scientist named Wally Broecker, and he's an 80-year-old man who has been obsessed with climate change since probably the 1950s, and he's been peer reviewing articles written by other scientists for a very long time. And so when a journalist wants to know whether or not the catastrophe in New Orleans was related to climate change, Wally is one of the very few people who they can call who could really venture a guess along those lines. But for the rest of us, it's really hard to understand all of the complexities of how what we're doing impacts something as complex as the environment, as the ecosystems that we're surrounded by. So basically, the takeaway of that is that you don't have to be a specialist or an environmental researcher of any particular kind in order to make an impact, because you're basically just as qualified as most other people on Earth are to make an impact on the environment. I am pretty much one of the most unlikely people to have done this. I grew up on a ranch in Texas, just kind of a country girl. And I moved to the big city because I wanted to deal with technology. So I'm like all of you guys, I'm really interested in technology and have been for years. And unfortunately, I couldn't really do a whole lot in Brenham, Texas, to shape the way that technology was going to impact our lives in the future. So after having moved to the New York City and having worked in the technology field for quite a while, and having noticed several ways that I could make incremental changes using technology to impact the environment, I ran into the work of Michael Pollan. Now, I don't know about here in Germany, but in the States, he is almost a household name at this point. He wrote a book called The Omnivores Dilemma, which really was one of the catalysts in the food movement in the United States. So in the local food, knowing where your food comes from, the sustainable farm-to-table movement, he was basically the author of it. And one article that he wrote for the New York Times, in this article, he made the point that actually the food movement is not just about being a responsible consumer and buying this produce that someone else has grown responsibly. It's also about actually getting your hands dirty and growing some of it yourself. So he brought the whole DIY aspect of things into the food movement, and he really reminded me of that, what it had been like to grow some of my own food and learn from these little old ladies who grew everything that they ate. When I was growing up in Texas. The problem was that I lived in a New York City apartment on a 5th floor walk-up with no balcony or no room to use any of the traditional techniques for growing that I was familiar with and that Michael Pollan was talking about. I did not have a California backyard. So I started to look at, but he had really gotten to me. I really wanted to participate in growing some of my own food. So I started to look at my opportunities within my apartment from the standpoint of a plant. And the one resource that I really had to offer was my window and the year-round climate control that I already had indoors. So I had this vision. What if I could take hydroponics, this technology that NASA has been using to experiment with growing food in space, that pot growers around the world have been using to grow their cash crops very reliably. What if I could actually implement that in my apartment so that at least some portion of my own food would be there growing constantly in front of my eyes? The thing was that just doing that for myself, it would be cool, but it would be just kind of my own personal project. And I started to think about the fact that there are actually probably about 3 billion other people like me on planet Earth who live in these little boxes, and all they have is a window to offer plants indoors. So as soon as I started looking at this, not just from the standpoint of what it was going to do for myself and my being able to show my cool hydroponic garden to my friends, but what if I could actually scale this up from the beginning? So if it were not just my window that were filled with growing greens, but windows all over the place. I want to take a step back for a little bit now from this moment and talk about my tech background. So I had the privilege of going to New York University, the Interactive Telecommunications program, and I got to study under one of the luminaries in our field, Clay Shirky. He wrote a book called Here Comes Everyone, and then another one recently called Cognitive Surplus. And one of his areas that of real interest was open source, first of all, and secondly, crowdsourcing. So back in about 2005, 2006, I was studying under him during the time that Wikipedia was really starting to blow up. There were a lot of entries being created there. There was also Amazon's Mechanical Turk coming online and all other kinds of crowdsourcing projects. But at that point, sitting in his class, I was really frustrated that a lot of the crowdsourcing projects were really reducing human beings to little more than fancy robots, essentially. We were doing very simplistic tasks. And I was really excited about Wikipedia because what was happening there was really much more of a collaboration. There was a back and forth between individuals that was building to something much bigger. And that really inspired me. And I started thinking, this mass collaboration thing, we really need to take that farther. We need to figure out how to have lots of people be able to interact with one another and build upon one another's work. The second kind of big moment that I had shortly thereafter was I decided to take on some environmental art projects. And one of them, I started hacking some technology that some scientists had been developing for sewer treatment. So their idea was that they were going to take all of the urine that was coming out of all of our toilets, and they were going to divert it out of the normal sewage treatment stream, and they were going to put it into its own stream so that it could be treated. And it was going to be a very huge infrastructure project, and in fact, it's been undertaken in Switzerland. But I decided that I wanted to hack that for the individual level. So a friend of mine and I, we set up our own little chemistry lab in my apartment. And we started taking this large-scale technology And we just boiled it down to something that could be done at the individual scale. So it was a little kit that let you turn your own urine into fertilizer. And it was a crazy, kind of funny environmental art project. We did it in a whole bunch of places, and at the Ars Electronica Festival, and people really loved it. But the really important thing that I got out of that project was that, first of all, people were really excited about the opportunity to do something themselves. And they would come back to me after having turned some of their pee into fertilizer that they were going to then use on their houseplants and say, hey, I've got another idea about how you should apply this. You should really, put this into a composting toilet of some kind. And I would look back at them and I would say, like, this is not my thing. Why don't you take it? Why don't you put it in the composting toilet? Why don't you take it to the next level? And there was just something that went off when people thought, oh, wait, I can do this? And it was seeing that little burst of interest that made me realize that we all often think like consumers. We think that somebody else needs to do this for us. And it's just because we've been living in a civilized world for a very long time that we have largely forgotten our own power to just go ahead and hack things. What I learned through the process of doing this urine to fertilizer transformation project was that using the internet, I could look up all of these research articles by scientists, 90% of which I didn't understand, but I understood just enough to give me a little thread of something to work with. And then secondly, for anything that was beyond my personal capacity, I could look in my social network. And within about 2 to 3 degrees of separation, I could usually find a link to someone who is an expert in a given field. And so that was how I was able to work through some pretty advanced chemistry in my own kitchen. What if we continued to do that? If not only I did that, but if lots of people did that, we could work through some really challenging projects. So that's when I came up with the idea for something that I call R&DIY. So applying mass collaboration to solve environmental problems, but doing it as ordinary citizens. We're the ones who know what it is that we need for our particular situations, and we have resources that we can mobilize to get something accomplished that we don't feel specialized enough to do. I thought that I needed something to start this project off that was going to be very tangible and very easy for most people to do, as well as something that people were excited about. Unfortunately, turning your pee into fertilizer is not the most, appealing thing for a lot of people, but growing some of your own food is. So my first case study for research and develop it yourself was going to be window farms. And that is when I launched this video on YouTube.
I'm Britta Riley, and this is where I live, Brooklyn, New York. Lots of cement, lots of people, lots of snow, not a lot of farms. This is what I like to eat, fresh food, mostly vegetables. And this is where I get a lot of my food. I have no idea where most of it comes from. But I do know where some of my food comes from. In fact, it comes from a window in my apartment. This is my window farm. It's a vertical hydroponic garden made out of water bottles, tubing, an air pump, and some hydroponic supplies. Most of this stuff I got out of the recycling bin at my apartment building and at my local hardware store. Not only do I know where this food came from, I know exactly what nutrients fed the plants that I'm eating. And I grew the plants up from seed myself. The window farm works because an air pump generates a little bubble at the bottom of a tube submerged in the nutrient-rich water. The bubble carries a column of water on top of it, and it rises up through the tube and spurts out the top. Then the water trickles back down through all of these bottles. I'm no longer the only window farmer. In fact, in the 6 months since I launched the Window Farms project with some friends here in New York, people are building window farms and growing their own food in the heart of cities all around the world. They've been downloading instructions that are available for free on windowfarms.org. After they build their systems, they join in a mass collaboration online. Together, we all identify issues with the Window Farm systems, propose solutions, and test techniques for how to best grow different kinds of plants. Whereas NASA is researching how to grow vegetables on the space station, we're researching how to grow food in the unlikely conditions of city windows. I call this process of ordinary people contributing small innovations to collectively solve environmental problems, R&DIY, or research and develop it yourself. Through the insights of window farmers, the designs keep evolving. Look at my first system. Wow, it was pretty janky, but it kind of worked. Andy and Hugh improved stability and performance by screwing the bottles together and testing new pumps. Jackson suggested using the more efficient air pump technique. Ian solved the noise problem by making something like a gun silencer out of a vitamin bottle. Nico added LED grow lights. And teams in Italy, Finland, Hong Kong, and Spain are translating the designs for their local materials and languages. With each improvement, it's easier for the next person who joins to build a window farm. So now we have a multidisciplinary team of hackers, foodies, teachers, gardeners, all around the world collaborating online to solve one of the biggest problems facing our environment: how to supply fresh, local food to people in cities.
Thanks. Yeah, so hundreds of thousands of people around the world have now watched that video, and are over the course, that was in 2009 that I launched that video, and we now have 33,000 people around the world on this website. So it has been a really crazy experience, and this is a little bit of the behind-the-scenes view of what happened, because I had no idea when I launched that what was going to happen, essentially. But so basically, Window Farms has taken over my life for the last 3 years. So that was 2009. It's now 2012, and definitely all the way through 2013, I'm going to be very deeply embedded in this. So what happened along the way was that, first of all, I was like, oh my God, what do I do with all of these people? And all of a sudden, something that had gotten to be just kind of like a crazy idea became a full-time job, not just for one person, but for several people. And so basically, I've had to figure out ways of making that work and be sustainable, because it's such a beautiful thing that I've wanted it to live, but I've had to figure out how to make it work, and that's what I'm going to talk about. So the first thing is, you gotta be willing to put stuff out there that's broken, and you gotta let people talk about it. There's something really fascinating about watching someone else struggle a little bit. When it comes down to us humans, we're very, very strange creatures, but we like to watch people be working through something. And I think that's part of what has gotten so many people involved in this. You also, there's the term in software, we talk about fail early, fail often. Same thing applies here. You got to be willing to put pictures up of something that is not perfect and doesn't work. And that will actually be the much more visited image. Yeah, these are some more of the pictures of my very janky beginnings. And this is an image from one of the times when I lost my entire crop because one of my pumps went badly. And that's when I made a very major decision about what strategy we were gonna use regarding pumps at that point in time. But when you do fail, you want to always learn from that. One of the things that I hear people talk about very often is they say, I can't do this because I don't have a green thumb. I don't know. Is that a common expression in German too? Do you have some equivalent like that? Yeah. So getting a green thumb, it's not something that you're born with. It's something that's developed by killing plants and then figuring out why you killed them. What was it that went wrong? And then furthermore, if you're going to be doing that through a collaboration, you want to publish that failure and let everyone know what your hypothesis was for what went wrong so that they can then avoid that same problem in the future. And when you do this, other people follow you. They also publish their failures and help troubleshoot what went wrong with that particular plant. They're willing to put their pictures up of their duct taped together window farms. And they will put together really crazy contraptions that kind of work and kind of don't as well. And that's how you find your people. That's how you build community. Throughout this process, those people help eliminate parts that we see don't work universally for everyone, because everyone's trying out a very similar design, and they say, you know, I'm still having that same problem that you're having, and someone introduces a new solution. And so that's how we can move very quickly through designs. Another lesson that I learned a long time ago, before I started this project, was when I was doing a specification for a massive website for this organization called the Smithsonian in the US. And what they do is they basically own all of the best stuff, the national kind of archives, essentially, in the United States, as well as they do a lot of scientific research. And their mission is to publish this and put it out there for the US public. And one of my projects was to get them into Web 2.0 and to make it so that they could actually publish what they were developing. And throughout the course of that project, what I had to do was evaluate a whole bunch of different open source software platforms for web publishing and to determine which one the Smithsonian should go with. And through that process, I got to understand one of the most fundamental things about running an open source or a mass collaboration project, which is that you must keep the community's health and well-being for the long term in mind. And so I brought that to R&DIY, and I was very conscious about creating a culture. So first of all, I wanted everyone to know what our mission was. And our mission was to navigate between the needs of people who are going to be living with the plants, the planet, so the environmental impact that we're having while we're doing this, and the needs of the plants. These things have to be technically functional and run well to serve the plants. So there were a few tenets that I continually put out there into the community until the community internalized it and began self-policing. So first of all, don't just put out ideas. You need to actually be willing to try them. Secondly, be a tester. Being the idea guy is not the coolest thing in our community. The way cooler thing is to take an existing idea and actually be the one who implements it and finds out all of those really interesting nitty-gritty details that emerge once you actually put something into action. Be a proposer. So if you run into a problem or you're skeptical about something working that someone else has proposed, come back with a counter proposal. And also acknowledge that your particular design criteria and needs are not necessarily going to be shared by everyone. Someone else might have their own needs. Secondly, just really reminding people that they are authorized to make the decisions. So giving the community a lot of power as far as decision making is concerned. And then finally, this has been really the very challenging part, because managing a mass collaboration does require it requires a lot of back-end technological solutions, which I have not had a lot of access to on my budget. So creating some sort of platform where people can share their ideas. And along those lines, one of the needs that emerged is we started running into the U.S. patent system. And one of the areas that's really occurred for me as being the place that we need to be working, and that we're starting to work now, is to make all of the designs that we share with one another follow the guidelines of the international patent and trademark offices, so that as people come up with new innovations, they can actually be acknowledged as prior art by these organizations, because generally the way that people publish their designs online is not recognizable by the USPTO. It's not, the line weights are not precisely the way that they should be, or the language has not been written in that way. So that's one of the things that we're building into our community going forward, is having people build something so that it can be acknowledged as an open source contribution to public intellectual property. And then you get to sit back and enjoy watching the most beautiful experiences that happen as people around the globe get to collaborate with one another and pass ideas back and forth. The next idea is getting forked. So that's a very common term in open source software. So if you look at the course of history, everyone who has invented something has always stood on the back of another technology that came before it. And that's what we're continuing to do. But the question comes in, who gets to decide when something is a viable course for the community? So I try and leave it very open. So Brian White here, he introduced a design that it doesn't really work with window farms, but he's kind of really just interested in pumping technology for application in various other areas. And I let him just decide and throw that out there, and he started a contest online. Somebody else decided that they wanted to make window farms wearable. Now, I would not consider that a very universal design concern, but why not? So over the course of time, there's been this wonderful tension that happens between what I would call the core concerns, so the concerns that are shared by the most people, represented here in green, and the yellow concerns, which are either they may be specific to a particular community or a particular set of constraints, or they might just be an interest that was once there for some people and it was solved by a new innovation. But we can let all of those plethora of designs coexist. So again, the green area there is naturally, there's an attraction. More of the traffic ends up going to the areas where someone else says, oh yeah, I've got that problem too. That's why I like this particular design. So I, as the kind of administrator, I get to watch those traffic patterns and learn from them. But I'm also the one who's concerned with the mission of the project. So again, people will sometimes get very focused on their own particular concerns, or they'll be designing for some particular reason. But the other thing that I'm really looking for is the intersection of all of our three mission areas. So the last area is dealing with the financial sustainability of this mission over time. And this has been, one of the things when something that you really love takes off, you really want to find a way to make sure that it can continue over time. So this was basically the arc of it for me. Very early on, it started getting a lot of traction, and I realized, oh my God, this costs a lot of money. And I put a donation bar up on the website, and over the course of 2 years, I think $50 US was donated, and I was like, "What is going on, people?" But really, there's a relationship that we have with the internet where we're used to getting things for free, and we don't really think about how much work goes into it on the back end. So I realized that, you know what, the donation model is just not going to work. So the first way I funded it was with Kickstarter. But I didn't do a Kickstarter just to get money for the project. It was to create DIY kits to save people the trouble of having to gather all of the materials. One of the big revelations there, though, as I started to unfold that DIY kit business, was that repurposing water bottles actually has pretty large environmental impacts. And at the same time as I was kind of scaling it up, I was noticing that we had a bunch of people coming to the community who were not DIYers. They didn't actually want to make it themselves. So it got to the point where the community itself was leading me in a new direction. We needed to start looking out again for the planet, for the environmental impacts, and for the plants, essentially. So that, to that point, most of our DIYers had been much more focused on building the systems and had not been paying quite as much attention to the plants. So that's when we went to a fully designed and engineered product that I got to write the specifications for based on what I'd learned from the community over the last 3 years. And at that point, I was able to focus the community much more around the experience of the plants and the sharing of knowledge about the plants. So what we're working towards now is what we call the Window Farmer's Almanac. An almanac is it's a body of knowledge that's put together by a bunch of farmers based on what kind of experience they've had with plants in different kinds of microclimates. So we're trying to make that digital around this digital community of people around the world. So as Brenda asks, how long can I harvest my arugula? And Macy answers that question, we can have their knowledge as well as all of the knowledge of other people growing arugula be aggregated together, and then that can be there to supply information to new people coming on board who want to know what they can grow in their particular Windows microclimate, and they can find a suitable pairing of plants. So the way that I've been able to make all of these new parts of the project unfold has been to create revenue streams on one side to also continue to fund the social mission. And there are some new organizational forms that are available in the States, and I'm not sure what they look like here, but we're actually incorporating as a social enterprise.
Hi, I'm Britta. I run the Window Farms project here in Brooklyn, New York. Window farms are vertical hydroponic gardens that let you grow some of your own food indoors, even during the winter. There's a pump on a timer that sends liquid nutrient solution directly to your plant's root systems, so you get great nutrition in small spaces. Until now, window farms have been made out of water bottles using our open source website. But the water bottle versions take a lot of time to put together, and not everybody who wants a window farm is MacGyver. So with your help, this is what the new window farms are going to look like. I asked a couple of top industrial designers and engineers to help us make beautiful new window farms that just snap together and make it so easy to care for your plants. You can keep it simple by growing salad greens and herbs, or you can go big with things like strawberries, cherry tomatoes, and peppers. You don't have to have a green thumb. There are 22,000 of us window farmers online, and we are committed to making sure that we all know how to grow. I want more of you to come join us in knowing where at least some of our own food comes from, and being able to grow produce at home that's fresh, crisp, bursting with flavor, and pretty much as local as it gets. I want more of you to have the joy of nature at eye level, and to be able to share that with your friends and your families. Okay, so here's the deal. In order to get the new window farms produced, we need 500 of you new window farmers to come on board right now, all at once. With 500 pre-orders, we can afford to get the molds made, and we can meet the minimum production quantities. But if we can get 2,000 of you guys to come on board right now, we can afford to get the new window farms produced here in the States. So if you ever wanted a window farm, or your mom wanted one, or your kid's teacher wanted one, or your boyfriend wanted one, now is the time. The way Kickstarter works, we either hit the minimum and we all get window farms, or none of us do. So how about this? Why don't you be the first person on your block to get a window farm? And then tell your neighbors about it, so that 6 months from now, you guys can be swapping tips about your strawberries and your cherry tomatoes and your arugula, and we'll all be learning together how to grow again. And at that point, when everyone's doing it, you and I and anyone who comes to our website is going to know that you were one of the ones who helped make it all happen.
So that was a video that I put on Kickstarter the next time. When I went to launch this. And we were successful. We brought in $257,000 in pre-sales, and we were able to get the window farms manufactured in the United States, which is a huge victory for our kind of failing manufacturing. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Britta. I run the window.
Wrong way. So the final lesson that I just want to talk about is trust. That video, what you probably don't know is that it took me 319 takes to get that video, because you can imagine what it's like when you've been running this project for such a long time, you're totally out of money. You're so excited about making it happen, but it seems so far away. It just seems like there's no way anyone is ever going to do this. They're going to think you're crazy. And so when you're talking to a camera, that's right there in front of you, and you're trying to convince people, it's really hard to get out of your own head. And it took me 319 takes to get to that point where I believed that all of you guys were in this with me as much as I was. And that is really the key to making the environmental movement work, is that you have to trust that other people are in it with you. So I'm going to go back to the beginning. No one knows what they're talking about with the environment. No one is a specialist. And you don't need any kind of specialty degree in order to be able to make a difference. And so therefore, I hereby anoint you all environmental pioneers. Thank you.
Brilliant.
Do I have time for questions?
Yeah. You did it. Not only did you give a most amazing talk. I think anybody who can stand on the stage, talk about pee for 10 minutes and get away with it has won already. But you also landed on point. So we have 20 minutes left for questions. So please don't be shy and use this opportunity to, find out the details about how you can install this window farm in your window. And please, let's see some raised hands. Yeah. Do you have a mic? Mic's coming.
Hi. Last time I checked on the website, the kit was not available outside of the United States.
I'm working on it. That's one of the reasons why I'm here. Yeah.
Okay, over here, please.
Hi, I'm Phil from Avocado Store. I'm running Germany's biggest online marketplace for sustainable products, and we would like to have your product.
Great, we'll talk afterwards.
This is good. At this rate, you can all ask a question.
2 questions. First of all, have you ever any connections to the vertical gardens movement in Holland for outside walls?
I'm sorry, say it one more time.
In the Netherlands, there's a movement going on for growing vertical gardens in the outside walls of buildings. Do you have any connections to that?
there are a lot of movements going on in the gardening world right now. Thank God, we are having finally a revolution for those of us who have, grown very distant from agriculture, which is very human, fundamental to human society. So I am so glad that there are so many different kinds of that going on. I am particularly focused on just growing inside of apartments.
Okay.
Yeah.
I only thought this could be a great combination. The second question, when you talk about the Almanac for the gardeners,
Yeah.
Do you have already a publishing infrastructure for that?
Yes, we're launching the alpha version of it. Actually, we already launched it last week to a small community, and we're growing it. So we're rolling that out right now. But it's going to be under development for many phases. Yeah.
As a web platform, I suppose.
Yes.
Okay.
More questions? Okay, I will go. So you said you're working on bringing them to Europe. You got me already. I really want one.
Okay, cool.
I grow herbs on my balcony, but I live on a big street, so I always fear they're polluted. I'd much rather grow stuff inside. How do I do it? What would be my concrete next step?
Well, so you should come back to our website in September or October.
Okay.
They're being manufactured right now, and they won't ship even to the people who ordered them on Kickstarter. That's another thing that I'd like to say for any of you all who are considering doing Kickstarter-based manufacturing projects. You're probably going to be late. We were late, and I think everyone who has done a manufacturing project on Kickstarter has been late. That's one of the kind of things about that platform is it's really difficult to get everything up and running within that short time frame. But in any case, so they'll ship in the United States and to a few people who ordered them on Kickstarter in Europe in August. But then we're hoping to roll some out for specifically, I think we're going to start with Germany because you guys apparently really like window farms. So September, yeah.
Excellent. Okay, we'll be watching out for that. Are there any more questions? The lady in the red, please. Anya?
Way in the back?
No, in the middle, the lady with the red,
sorry.
and then afterwards, those two waving hands in the back.
Hi, I'm Anya. You probably get that question a lot, but I just wonder how many days of a month or a week or the year can your community members live on their window farms? Do you have any information on that?
Yeah, this is a really excellent question. So first of all, you're not going to live on your window farm. No one is. It really takes many, many hectares of land to generate enough food to feed a single human being. And we're kind of not really aware of that anymore, I don't think, because we can go to the grocery store and we see a lot of produce there together. But so again, it's a little bit about what Michael Pollan was talking about, of reconnecting with food in a way so that it's much more of a learning experience and more of kind of a way of satisfying that biophilia, the yearning to be around nature that we experience as people who live in cities. And it actually can make a pretty good dent on the financial side if you choose to grow the types of plants that are very high turnover. So for example, I use a lot of basil and a lot of kale and things like that. And you can grow what are called cut and come again greens, where you can continue to harvest from the same plant over a longer period of time. So I basically, the way that I think about it is that I can get about a side salad a day out of mine, but I have a very big window farm. Yeah.
Hi, it was very inspirational. I'm just curious what happened to the original DIY pioneers when you changed directions, as you said, to kind of save the mission. So there's a tension between the people who want to do things themselves and the people who want to make a change but need an easier way. So how do the two will the Almanac solve your problem, or linking the two?
Yeah, they can both live together in harmony. I mean, there's nothing has happened. The community, the DIY community is growing like wildfire, and we now have people on there who have been doing it for 3 years and are, absolute experts at this point, just as much as I am. So it's continuing to thrive, and I'm really trying to continue to build tools to give that community the best possible infrastructure. But it's pretty well taken care of at this point, I hope.
We have one more question up here, please.
Yeah. Hi, I also like to talk very much, but I would like to know more about the fertilizers. Now, one of the key reasons to actually build such a garden or such a device to actually grow plants would be, of course, to use only organic stuff to fertilize the plants. Now, is that possible in a setting like that?
That is exactly what we are most, one of the biggest concerns on the plant side. So hydroponics traditionally use inorganic nutrients. There's nothing really wrong with that. It just does not supply as diverse nutrition to the plants. So you're not eating as diverse nutrition. And the environmental impacts for inorganic growing in hydroponics are much less than they are when you're dumping a whole bunch of nitrogen and phosphorus out on fields, and then that's running off out into the sea. But I specifically designed the new window farms, building on the design advantages that we did with the DIY kits, so that they can make the best possible use of organic hydroponic nutrients. The traditional problem with organic hydroponic nutrients is that they're very unstable, and so they precipitate down into a kind of sludge at the bottom, so it's no longer available in the water. But we designed them to have a curved bottom with the suction intake right there at the bottom, so it works to constantly continue to have those organic nutrients be circulating through the plants. We also have, there are so many amazing resources for giving nutrition with hydroponics that we've forgotten about as a culture. That they were under research in like the 60s and 70s a lot, I know in California. But using nutrients from the sea, essentially from the seafloor, it's just the same as it was on land before we overgrazed all of these crops. And it's available there in the oceans, and we could actually make really good use of those nutrients for excellent nutrition for human beings in cities.
Thank you.
Yeah.
More questions? Okay, last calls for more questions for Britta. There? Okay, the gentleman with the... No, did you not? Oh, sorry. I'm like, oh, look, there's somebody who moved. You can ask another one, because we've got some time left, so please, if you have some, keep them coming.
So I got one other question about efficiency. Now, I mean, you have to ship all the stuff, like the fertilizers and the kit and whatever, and isn't it a lot less efficient? So it's more the educational part that's valuable there, because if you build like a large-scale farm or even a medium-sized farm, then it's still very efficient if you bring out the fertilizers, the stuff you actually need to get the plants growing, rather than the small model where you have to put in everything yourself, wouldn't it?
Yeah, so basically the way that I like to talk about this is in terms of us having a hypothesis that we're testing. So it's not a good comparison to just directly compare what we're doing to a farm, for example, because if you live in a city, how are you going to get the food from the farm, right? So what we've been looking at we're still actually looking for good statistics that we can use as a comparison for agriculture of the kind that we're dealing with. But one statistic is that it takes 10 calories of fuel to get those of us who live in cities the food that we eat in the grocery store, so our fresh produce. And if that is true, then we are definitely below that amount of carbon that we're using. Because when you think about it, I grew up on a farm, and we used fuel-based, petroleum-based fertilizers. We used fuel to drive the tractors. We then had to use refrigerated trucks to basically transport the material. Then it has to be refrigerated at the store. Then, so once you take into account all of those things, there's the plastic packaging that everything is wrapped in. Once you think about that, it's actually a huge amount of energy that goes into getting us food in cities. So that little amount that you're growing using an air pump that only turns on once an hour for a few minutes, that is actually, in all likelihood, a much smaller carbon footprint. But we're still testing that and trying to find good numbers. So.
Okay, if there are no other arms rising up right now, then I think...
There's one more.
Okay, we'll have the last question then, please.
Thank you. I was wondering, you were talking about the impact of recycling bottles to use them to grow the plants. But if you're producing the kits now, doesn't that disappear? Or what kind of material are you using for the kits?
Yeah, so basically what I was comparing it to is that we're going to have a lower carbon footprint making something specifically for this purpose and controlling all of those variables and inputs that went into it, as opposed to my going to the local hardware store and buying all of these little components that have mostly been made in China for the most part, and then were shipped all the way to me in New York City, and then I'm paying retail prices for all of them. Plus, I'm customizing them in ways that make them no longer really recyclable or things like that. So once you take into account all of those little granular impacts, it really comes out to be a much bigger impact than just designing something from the ground up for every component of it to be able to be recycled. So we chose plastic, but a specific kind of plastic that I knew was, the healthiest possible plastic that was not going to leach into the plants, that was recyclable, where every single component of them is recyclable except for the pumps. Once you start going into the realm of getting to the possibility of doing custom manufacturing, you can do that at a much lower carbon footprint than what you can do when you're doing DIY with a whole bunch of things that we get as consumers.
Right, thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Britta. Everybody,
Welcome.
Give it up again, please, for Britta Ridey.
Thank you.